You're watching the free version of this tutorial. Upgrade to premium for all footage in project and exclusive content. And welcome back. We are looking now at a very powerful technique called Unlink Tracking. And this is really going to be using the power of Mocha's planar tracker and the separation between track data and shape data to get us a track that otherwise will be very difficult to get. Let's have a little look at our footage here. And we have ourselves what looks to be a sort of handheld pan rotation type thing going around on a basketball court. Let's draw just a shape in the middle here. And have a look down at the layer properties, and we can see link to track here. And this link to track lets us link multiple shapes to a single bit of tracking data. Now, normally I use this drop down when I'm doing road scoping, so I can track once and then link multiple shapes to that same track. But we can also turn this to none. And what this will do now is it will still track my data, still track my shape, but the shape itself won't move at all. And this is really useful when we're working on footage that has a large sway of motion, so a large camera move, a large panning shot, something like that, where the object that we're following moves off screen, but there's always a whole load of coplanar objects on screen at any time anyway. And that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to take my shape. This particular piece of footage, everything on this floor is in the same plane. So I can take a large area and use this. If we were working with a panning or tracking shot where it was the background that we're after, then of course we would just highlight that area there instead. But this is going to be quite good. And let's call this one Unlink Track. And come down to my tracking parameters. I'll leave the minimum percentage of pixels used at default, 30, which is fine. And I'll turn perspective on because we do have an amount of perspective change going in this particular shot. And let's just hit track forwards. Now it doesn't look like it's actually doing anything. And that's because at the moment we're only seeing the shape data. We're not even seeing the tracking data at all. So how do we see the track data? Well, let's turn our planar surface back on and let's sort this out. Let's just place this up here somewhere. We'll just put it roughly in the right area for now. Maybe turn the grid on to see how that's looking. What I'm doing there is just trying to align the grid lines up here before I can just shift that back again, so I know that that's in the right sort of area. I'm pretty confident we're in the right sort of area now. Good. Okay. And let's just carry on tracking forwards. Now you'll see the shape stays in the same place, but the track and the planar surface is tracking along in the background and looking pretty good. In fact, we turn this back, and that's not bad at all. And we'll track this one backwards. And you can see now, when it gets to that last little bit, around about here, because the shape itself doesn't really have a lot of information in it, obviously the track is going well off and not being very good at all. So what can we do about that? Well, it's fairly straightforward. Let's come in, turn that off for a second. Let's start slipping around about there actually. I can always come in and keyframe this shape so that we're getting a bit more information coming through. So let's come up and just use the transform box maybe to make that a little bit bigger there. And a little bit wider over on that side. As we saw before, just for safety's sake, I do want to get rid of these other keyframes. I don't want to have those influencing the track in any way. So come to my dope sheet, just delete those up. And you see the line under here turns to red to show that it's now untracked. So track these backwards one more time. Pause that there. Maybe when we get to around about here, I'll get a bit more information there as well. So let's go and just retrack that. And you can see that the keyframe is also moving along there as well. So it's important to note that the movement of this shape has no direct bearing on the movement of the surface. It's only defining the area where Mocha's looking to see what the actual movement is. And that's what the track is going to give us. So we have another look here. And we can see that's a little bit better. But going off from around about frame 26. So it's not perfect yet. But we can do something else here as well. What we can do is we can add another shape to this same layer. And we can track those two shapes. And this is something that we can do even when it's just a normal track, not when it's a just unlinked tracking. And we take a look at the button here. This is our Create X-Spline layer. That's not what we want. We want the one next to it, which is the Add X-Spline to layer. So what this does is it adds another point of reference to our track. And because this is going on the same layer, we've only got the one layer still. Note that I've put these quite far away from each other and they're not overlapping. And the reason for that will become clear in a slightly later exercise. And it's important that when we want to add the sum of these two shapes together, that we aren't overlapping at all. So let's just come back now and just retrack this. And if I turn my surface on, you can see that once we get past that sticky stage at frame 26, where we're having all that trouble last time, we've now got a nicer track, a much nicer track, because we've got this other area now giving us that extra data that we need. And just to make sure that everything's good on the other end, and just for good measure, what I'll do is I'll just refresh this a little bit, move this over here, just slightly out of the way. Just don't want to move my surface, so let's turn the surface off for a second. Move that a little bit off from the edge there, and maybe move that up so we've got the information coming up here as well, and then just track that forwards. Turn the surface on so we can see what's going on. Cool, and that's not bad. Let's have a look at that without the transform tool or the shape, and just have a look at that with the grid on. Just check that out. Pretty nice, and we'll do the insert clip, and we'll just insert the logo in the middle there, just to see how that's looking. Not bad at all. And when you're tackling longer shots where the camera is moving, Unlink Tracking is a great way of getting that track data, because you're not chasing stuff that's going off screen all the time. Let's just save this and come to another clip. Because there are limits with this Unlink Tracking technique and particular types of motion where this won't be suitable. So if we play through this here, I've got a car shot. We've got a lot of motion in depth here. Let's try and track the road in perspective. So I'll look to see whether there's any area that's relatively coplanar. It's going to be tricky, but I think, this bit here could give us the information. Take a little look. Let's just scrub through, because we're not having any movement on the shape. Scrubbing through is a decent way of just seeing whether that's going to work or not. And we can even sort of keyframe this out if we know we're getting into tricky areas. So we don't want to hit any of the cactuses or any of the little bushes. That's not going to help us too much. We definitely don't want to get the car in there. There we go. Okay. Let's do this unlinked track. Let's call this one road track and layer controls. Come down to layer properties, come to our link to track and set that to none. Okay. Track in perspective. turn our surface on, see what this is going to do, and maybe insert a grid so we can see what's happening with that. You can see that that grid is stretching out into the horizon. We know what the shape is doing, so let's turn that off. And let's just try and track this forwards. All right, well, that's not quite given us the same sort of tracking quality that we're after, and the same sort of tracking quality we had on the previous clip. And there's a few different reasons for that. I mean, one of them, let's actually turn off the insert grid there. One of them is, as we'll see when we're looking at 3D cameras, is that we've given this shape far too much work to do. This is taking in much too much of the depth data. But even if we don't do that, let's do just a miniature version of this. Call this one road 2 track. Do the same sort of thing. And track that forwards. As you can see, that's failed after 27 frames. It's going to be tricky to read this sort of motion because this isn't actually a coplanar surface. It looks fairly flat. The road goes up, the road goes down, and that sort of motion just isn't really suitable for unlinked tracking. If you did want to track this shot, a 3D tracker is much more suitable. If, on the other hand, we did want to track things like the sign or track the background so we can do sky replacement, then Mocha's going to be perfectly happy to do that using a suitable area for either the sign or something in the background here so we can track the sky in to do the replacement. But don't let that put you off unlinked tracking because it is a very valuable technique and one that you can use in many, many circumstances. In the next exercise, what we're going to be looking at is how we can start to use this tracking data that we've made. So we've got the tracking techniques down. How do we get that data out of Mocha and working in our host application? And that's all coming up in exercise 6.